Columbus, Georgia, this is your City Council. Mayor Teresa Tomlinson. City Manager Isaiah Hughley. Pop Barnes, District 1. Glenn Davis, District 2. Bruce Huff, District 3. Evelyn Turner Pugh, Mayor Pro Tem and District 4. Mike Baker, District 5. Gary Allen, District 6. Mimi Woodson, District 7. Tom Buck, District 8. Judy Thomas, Post 9 at-large counselor. Skip Henderson, Post 10 at-large counselor. Tiny Washington, Clerk of Council. And City Attorney Clifton Fay. Columbus, Georgia, this is your City Council.
Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the December 8th meeting of the Columbus City Council. We have a very full agenda today as we get into the holiday season. We have cram-packed a whole lot of business into our meeting today, and then we'll be meeting again next week. Usually it's once every 2 weeks, but we'll be meeting again next week in the evening, adjusting ourselves again for the holidays. So thank you so much for being here, and we have a couple of special treats this morning. We've got some special pledgers, but we want to start off as we do every time we're together. Pastor Marlon Scott is here. He is the chaplain at the Columbus Regional Health, and we would like to call him forward for the invocation, please. Good morning.
Good morning. Let us pray. Dear Lord, how grateful we are today to assemble for the blessing of our city and the blessing of our city leaders. We lift up our mayor. We lift up all our city leaders. We ask your blessings upon them and their families, and we thank you for their great sacrifice. And dear Lord, we pray that you would shed your grace on the great city of Columbus, that it would be the jewel of your eye. We ask your blessings now as we approach the Christmas season. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you so much, and thank you for all the work you do. We appreciate our partnerships with Columbus Regional, and so thank you. Please take back our greetings to them as well. Next, we have some really great pledgers. They have been practicing and working hard. We've got the puddle jumpers, and we're going to ask them to come forward, if they would, please, and assemble here in front of the clerk's desk. And as they come forward, if you all would stand and prepare to join with us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Who's the leader?
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. Wow. That is so good. We want to make sure we get to meet you this morning. So tell us your name and how old you are.
Say your name and how old you are. Say it. Say Addison.
We can come back.
She's Addison and she's 5.
Okay.
Ciraa, Sarai.
How old are you?
I'm 3. Jet.
Just say your name.
I don't-
How old you are?
I don't know.
Your name.
My name is Macy and I'm 4 also. My name is Aubrey and I'm 4.
No? You want me to say it? He's Gavin and he's 4. Your name?
I don't want to know.
You don't want to say it? He's Kason and he's 5.
Braylon.
And he's
4. My name is Carrie Mack and I'm 5. I'm Carson and I'm 5. I'm Layla, and I'm 4. I'm Brayden, and I'm 5. I'm Gabriella, and I'm 4. I'm Nick, and I'm 4. I'm Colton, and I'm 3. I'm Brady, and I'm 5.
And I'm Miss Cindy. I'm the lead teacher for the K4 class.
All right. Yeah.
And my name is Shannon. I am the lead teacher for the after-school program.
And my name is Valeska Reed. I'm the aide for K4.
Great. Well, you all have done a fabulous job. Let's give them a round of applause. We hope you'll come back soon and help us out again. So don't go far. Come back again someday. Thank you. All right. Well, as they assemble out, we're going to go ahead and get started with 2 public hearings that we have, and I'm going to turn it over to the city attorney at this time.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. These are public hearings that are required under Title 36 of the Georgia Code related to tax allocation districts and proposed renewal areas, redevelopment areas. The first one we're going to call up is the Fort Benning Technology Park area, and Rick Jones can kick us off. I know there are people here in the audience that want to be heard. Go ahead.
Good morning.
Good morning, Mayor and members of council. You have in front of you this morning 2 requests for consideration for tax allocation districts in the city itself. We want to go back and, as a refresher, remind you that this is a process we have to go through under state law that's required for us to establish these districts and so forth. You establish the districts primarily by developing the redevelopment plan itself for a particular area. And in those redevelopment plans itself, you can identify potential tax allocation districts, or TADs, at that point. Under state law, we're required also to notify the public at least 5 days ahead of time. We have done basically an overkill, or however you want to call it, in terms of trying to cover our bets here. We advertised back in the last 2 Sundays of November, and we advertised again this past Sunday as well, to indicate the public meeting from where they were and what times they would start and what was going on with that. So we have done all due diligence from that aspect itself. The thing we also want to remind you about today is we're under consideration here in terms of adopting the redevelopment plans and potentially the TAD districts themselves only. We're not advocating or asking for anything, or nothing's been asked of us really, in terms of saying particularly a particular project may go on in a TAD itself. That comes at a later date. That comes through a lot more scrutiny in terms of how we deal with the project and the financing and the activities and the land development and all the other good stuff that comes with that. That comes at a later date for us, and not till the next time frame. Going back just real quickly also, under this state law requirement, we have to have a public hearing for the public to come forward and make any comments or suggestions or whatever about the potential of that. There is not need to be any official action taken today. The official action will actually come on next Tuesday, if any at all happens at that time. At that time, a resolution will be presented to you, and then you'll be able to vote on it up or down or make modifications for it if you so desire at that particular point. The first one we really want to look at with you this morning, though, is this tax allocation district for the area to be known as the Fort Benning Technology Park. We passed out to you 2 staff reports this morning. This first one like I said, does deal with the Benning Technology Park itself. All the items you see in that staff report are requirements under state law. Every one of these items here, in terms of establishing the boundaries, financing from that, or potential financing needs and so forth from that, comes from involved with state law itself more than anything else. You also should have in front of you a large copy of the map for the proposed area itself, and we want to make sure you understand what goes on with that as well. The potential for this, for the Benning Technology Park itself, does consist The boundaries have been fully established. If required, it's showing 51 parcels and 298.7 acres of land in the southeast Columbus. And we have it on the screen for you to see everything in here in terms of what we're indicating from that point. The law also requires that it provides proof for redevelopment assistance here in terms of either pervasive poverty here or the existence, excuse me a second, or the existing conditions that impair sound growth and happening in the community. Any historical buildings in the area at least 40 years or old, predominance of structures that have relatively low value, and deteriorating or inadequate facilities at present. Please understand now, these 5 items here, you don't have all 5 of them to make this thing work. It only has to really meet one of that criteria. Not all 5, not 3 out of the 5, if we do with the enterprise zones, but just merely making sure that it meets one of those criteria in terms of our evaluation of what this tax allocation district can be. It talks about here in terms of the applicant describing any redevelopment projects, cost estimates, and financing methods. Yes, they do in their plan and what they provide to us in terms of showing potentially the number of businesses it could actually recruit, the number of jobs it could potentially build out at times from that, and dealing with that. It talks about does it need any type of contracts or any other type of action with that. And eventually it will in terms of working with the city from that standpoint. So yes, they do address that need from that standpoint. Also the idea about relocation payments. It does describe that, but we're not really sure there's going to be a need for any type of relocation payments at this time. We do talk about the possibility of if any road projects come in there later on at a later date in terms of need of right-of-way and things of that point, there may be some relocation assistance that has to happen at that time. For right now, though, there is no requirement for any type of relocation to take place with this TAD or this redevelopment plan itself. It also has to meet, of course, the comprehensive plan of the city and the Unified Development Ordinance as well. And in this case, it does meet both those requirements. Zoning will have to be taken care of as needed when development happens on the site or in the area itself. From that standpoint, talks about during implementation, our estimates of redevelopment costs to be been submitted, and yes, they have here in terms of that. In terms of it basically does an estimating of what could be developed out there and what we should be looking for from that standpoint. It talks also about potentially putting in 1.5 million square feet of potential development at this site and how that will occur. The question that also has to be asked in terms of the known assessed valuation of the redevelopment area and the estimated assessed valuation after. It does provide some benchmarks and some ideas about how those numbers would work and how it could come into play here. Right now, the estimated fair market value is a little over $6.9 million in that, and the taxable assessed value at 40% comes back at $2.3 million. From that standpoint. They talk again about the tax base could increase from that standpoint there in terms of potential investments and coming back. They're looking at approximately about $94 million in terms of real investment over time that could happen back into the area itself. So they do describe that and deal with it as well. They ask also, have they identified any historical properties in the area? There really aren't a great deal of historical properties in the area that really warrant or have warranted really status in terms of being classified under the national system or even under the local system. There are some historic churches, though, potentially historic churches that could be in that area that could be identified under this program, and we'll have to be kind of cautiously watched as we go along with any type of development from that standpoint. They have identified, of course, what they're proposing right now as the date for this thing to actually get started, which is December 31st of 2015. Again, that's a requirement we have to look at. It looks at basically a 30-year time frame right now for this TAD to be put in place and to go forward from that standpoint. It does establish the boundaries as required. Again, we said that. In terms of you see what's on the screen here this morning as well from that. It talks about specifying the ad valorem property tax. It does talk about how you can go about doing that in terms of showing what the actual total taxable rate is right now and the usable millage rate itself, basically being about $95,000 when you round it up to what actually could be collected today, and then looking at what their actual percentage-wise in terms of what they're going to be in terms of overall tax digest for the community is about 0.059% when it's all said and done in terms of what the actual collection would be in this area from that. Talks again about the amount of proposed tax allocation bonds. If they do utilize bonds in here, they're estimating that range between 10 and 20 million. Again, it's going to depend on what the school district consents to participate in as well. But they have projected what could be used in terms of bond usage for the community as a whole. Talks about the tax allocation increments for the period covered by the proposed tax allocation bonds. Again, it goes about 30 years. The calculation of this report assume really on the two financing issues really about 25 years in terms of how it could be captured from that standpoint. The questions also I ask here about does the applicant specify properties proposed for the pledge payment and security for payment of tax allocation bonds, and it does talk to that effect about in terms of the estimated amount being 1.5 million in terms of build out by year 10 from that standpoint in terms of using bonds or pay-as-you-go agreements to make these things happen in the community as a whole. The other important thing, if we look at, and we're required to look at, is dealing with the school district itself. The estimate I asked about the actual impacts to the school district overall when it's all said and done. Again, we're assuming right now that with the tax allocation district itself, not necessarily the redevelopment plan, but the tax allocation district that they are proposing, it's a relatively small area. It's undeveloped. There's not, from what we have talked about and discussed within in the past, there's not going to be a lot of development in terms of residential on this site. Probably no more than 50 units at the most. And we're estimating really that the number of children that the TAD itself would generate residential-wise is probably going to be probably around that number of five total children. That could escalate one way or the other, but right now we're looking at about 5 children, so it's not really any impact at all from that standpoint from the school system itself. There are the location of existing and planned schools in the area. We know that for the most part that Spencer High School is out there today. We know that St. Mary's Road and the former Casita Road Elementary, which is now really the enrichment services, really serve the area from that standpoint. There's no indication from our understanding right now that they couldn't handle any additional impact, whether it's 5 or 500 right now. We believe they could continue to do just that in the future. And looking at this also, we also know we've had conversations with the school district.
Rick, we have Councilor Huff with a question.
Sorry.
Real quick, I didn't want to get anybody disturbed this morning. It's not St. Mary's Road School, it's Casita Road that's enrichment services.
Yeah, I'm sorry. If I said that.
Yeah, I didn't want them upset this morning.
Casita Road, the former Casita Road Elementary is now enrichment services. Thank you.
Thanks.
That is ongoing, but again, we know that the school district is talking about relocating Spencer High School to accommodate that, and we think we could also accommodate any additional growth that occurs really in this area from that standpoint. The estimated splosh to be generated for the school district itself, they show a modest increase here, about $82,000 in terms of per year. If it goes on as it is today under the existing conditions, if they're looking at what they're projecting in terms of their numbers itself, we're going about $483,000 in terms of overall increase in terms of additional taxes on this. And they're also projecting that the school district could receive about a 1.1 million additional in annual property taxes if this tag goes forward and if it is developed as proposed here from that. We are still looking at the total tax digest to make sure everything is really in line with what we're talking about. From all indications right now, yes, there is. We have found some duplications in terms of some property tax for whatever reason in terms of the same amounts and so forth that just need to be kind of cleaned up. But everything we've looked at from this status and in reviewing this plan indicates to us that this TAD should go forward.
Mr. City Attorney.
Okay. If there are no questions of counsel for Mr. Jones, we'll move on. You got one? Councilor Thomas has a question, Mr. Jones, before
Councilor
we get on
Thomas.
to the applicant.
Mr. Jones, you spoke about the impact on the school district of number of students and that sort of thing. I know that one of the requirements of this program is for the school district to decide whether or not they will participate in the tax allocation, whether or not they will continue to collect their portion of the property tax, or whether they will allow that to stay in the TAD. Have there been any conversations with the school district along that line?
Yes, ma'am, there have. We have met indirectly with the school district on this, and I know the applicants have have made that point to them about trying to get some understanding and get some feedback from the school district. We have not got anything officially back from the school district, but we are working toward that right now.
I'm curious if there's anyone from the school district here this morning. No. Okay. I think that's a very important part of discussions, whether or not the school district will participate by leaving their 60% of the property tax there, or whether they will forego it. I think that's something that this council needs to know what their decision on that issue is. The other thing, Mr. Jones, if you would, I want to be sure that I'm really clear on, as you look at the map, and thank you for the map, by the way. Tell me the significance, I guess, is what I'm looking for, of the redevelopment area, the red, as it impacts the blue area. Why is all of this designated? I mean, the blue is what we're really talking about as the TAD. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yes, ma'am.
And then what significance does the rest of that property have?
I think really the applicant will have to kind of speak a little more directly about it. From my vantage point here, it's important that we look at everything around that area in terms of dealing with a potential TAD. In terms of identifying the area itself, in terms of the needs and making sure it qualifies as a TAD for the most part, you've got to look at these other areas to the north of where this light blue area is involved with that. In doing that, you set up, or at least establish the fact that there's a potential maybe for another TAD to come in later on. Particularly if you see up there around the Casita Road area and those areas, that groundwork has already been laid for the most part. I'm not saying this plan just stays intact forever and never has to be renewed sometime. But eventually, if someone or some entity else wants to come in and establish another TAD, that work is already done as far as establishing the redevelopment plan. By state law, you've got to develop a redevelopment plan for the area you're looking at itself. And they chose to go farther than just looking at this area at 185 and Victory. They decided to encompass a greater area. And apparently and again, I don't want to speak for the applicant from this standpoint, but apparently after looking at everything in the orange area and so forth, they drew back just to focus really on this one area as part of that being that TAD itself.
And by designating this as the redevelopment area, this does not give this area any greater legal standing
No, it does not.
to be designated perhaps later as a TAD. And so that if, for example, somebody wanted to go in and put a TAD here, where it's not orange, they could do that if they went through the process.
Yes, ma'am.
The same process. It wouldn't make any difference
That's correct.
with this other. And again, on the map, I'm assuming that at the bottom, at the lower right-hand corner of this map, the gray area is Fort Benning. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am. Everything.
And does either the TAD or the redevelopment area encroach on Fort Benning?
No, ma'am, it does not. This property that's been identified between the, if you will, indicate 185 here and then Custer and then Victory, is actually within the confines of the city of Columbus. It has been for the last, who knows. It was property, it was originally, my understanding, was originally under control of the Board of Regents, which then was also used by Columbus State University for biology classes, I was told at one time. It is a piece of property that's just never been developed, primarily because there has been no access to the site. We are curing that. Even as I speak right now, we are curing that in the sense that under the T-Splosh program, we are providing an interchange that goes actually accesses property and opens it up for development. And makes that property a lot more valuable in terms of a lot more revenue producing back to the city of Columbus in terms of everything that goes on. But there is nothing on Fort Benning's property. Anything we've had in terms of conversations with that has been with Fort Benning about making sure that we working in tangent with them in terms of their needs for security and our needs for access. So all those things have been worked out. The issue now is do you want to go forward with this tax allocation district or not?
And so when this comes to us, whenever it does, for a vote, we will be voting on establishing the redevelopment district and the TAD.
Yes, ma'am. You will be establishing by resolution, you'll be adopting actually the redevelopment plan for this area, and you'll also be adapting.
Which is basically this piece of...
Well, we provide you a week or so ago, or at least at the last council meeting, both copies of the draft for both of these applications. So
Right.
that's the document we're going to be approving and adopting, or you will be approving and adopting from that. But you'll also be approving or rejecting or approving with conditions the tax allocation district itself and establishing those boundaries as well.
And then one final question. I'm a little... tell me what, question number 17, the last one that says, has the staff validated the digest calculations? And you're saying we're still in the process of doing that?
When we were in the process, because of the time constraints are here, we were looking at trying to get everything pulled together. We have been working with Ms. Middleton on this to make sure that we can validate the numbers they are purporting in the TAD itself as being those numbers for the tax digest. She has come back to me and yesterday told me that there are some duplications they have compiled in there. They're minor things. There's nothing grandiose or anything out of proportion here. But if we got to still go back and verify those numbers and basically, like my turn, nobody else's, to actually certify those numbers and present them back and say, yeah, these are real numbers and these are numbers we can live with. But we are doing that and trying to work through that process now.
And as I recall, most of this area is undeveloped, if you will, or underdeveloped. And so is it accurate to say we don't anticipate that there would be any great change in anything going on there, I guess, from the tax commissioner or the tax assessor?
No. not for this one particularly. Because like you said, the tax allocation district that's been proposed is primarily, particularly that southeast section, is primarily undeveloped. There's nothing out there now. There's little to none in the way of infrastructure out there now that's going to have to be improvised and improved on that. If you go up there toward Casita Road and so forth, there's some areas up there, but they're really underdeveloped areas right now that could use some real help in terms of making them more viable to the community as a whole. So, yeah, for the most part, though, it is really relatively undeveloped out there.
And I may have said that was my last question, but it's not. I got one more. Are you aware of any specific projects that are on the table, if you will, on the boards for this area at this time?
Yes, ma'am. We have had conversations with the applicant, and I think you'll see it in the redevelopment plan itself, for potentially developing a business park on this site. That has been long-range thoughts involved with that. We've had conversations, though, even prior to the TAD itself, about what we do about rezoning, how we gain access, all that stuff, how we service this particular tract of land, because it is relatively, you can't serve it right now. We have had those conversations and made the applicant aware of those kind of needs, particularly the fact they're going to go through some type of rezoning process to make this property work. This is just another, in my estimation, just another piece of the puzzle we're trying to put together here to make this project work. And I think with the TAD, it'll certainly, if anything, in my estimation, again, it'll actually accelerate this project coming forward.
Thank you. Thank you, ma'am.
All right. We'll move along. This is all a public hearing. Mr. Jones has been through the staff report with you. Now we're going to call up the applicant, Flournoy Development Company, and their representatives. Then we'll hear from any other concerned citizens on this plan. Appreciate you being here. Can you give them your name and address again, if you will?
Yes, my name's Ken Blakely, the Blakely Advisory Group, 4681 Tall Pines Drive, Atlanta, Georgia, and I am an honorary puddle jumper as well. Good morning, everyone. Glad to be here this morning, and just wanted to update you on the current redevelopment plan for the Fort Benning area. We've gone through some of this material before. I'm giving a couple of new things, but I just wanted to highlight a couple things briefly, because I know you have a lot on your agenda. The state law basically says that TADs can be created in areas that really fall into one of three groups. They're either slums or a blighted area, they're a deteriorating area, or an area that lacks infrastructure. Any of those three criteria would qualify an area for consideration for TAD, and the Fort Benning proposed TAD area qualifies under all three. So this area clearly qualifies under the Act as it's currently drawn. As Rick had shown you the map of the area. This is basically the same map, just on top of Google. The red line is the redevelopment area. The blue line is the proposed TAD that would be created in the area, mostly in the southeastern part of the proposed area. And it's set up in a way so that if in the future you wanted to have a second TAD in the area, in that red area, you could create a second TAD and include that in the area. We didn't include it at this point because one of the things we're trying to be mindful of is the cap on your 10% cap, and that is all TADs potentially in the city collectively. So given that there isn't anything proposed on those other sites, we didn't include that in there, but you'd have the option in the future, since you would approve the redevelopment plan, all you basically have to do is approve a resolution to create just the TAD piece, a second TAD in that, potentially in that area. If we look at this area representative, a couple of key things that are important for the state law, as Rick has outlined. The taxable digest today is about $2.3 million in this area. So even though it's 300 acres, it has very low taxable value. It only makes up 0.05% of the city's digest, not even, it barely registers in terms of the value of the area. So it gives you 9.95% more additional room to create additional TAD. So it doesn't have much impact on your future ability to create TADs. Flournoy Development is proposing to develop a business park on this site. They've been working on this for a while. As Rick mentioned, one of the barriers is the lack of infrastructure to get on the site and basically open the site for development. Their current plan would build out up to a 1.5 million square feet of space. That would have a market value of about 116 million. And once that's on the rolls and is taxable, we estimate it'd be worth about 46 million. So for the district, just creating that project represents a 20% increase in the tax value of the TAD once that project's completed from its current value of about 2.3 million. Based on an initial calculation, it looks like the project, that development, would support up to $14 or $15 million in TAD proceeds, depending on how exactly you determine later to finance that. So there would be a significant TAD potential in the area. Again, a couple things I just highlight. If your decision is to go ahead and approve the Fort Benning TAD, you do have a project that's in the pipeline that could move forward quickly, and I think that would be a significant addition to this portion of Columbus. We believe it would add significantly to the total digest of the area, and it would support a potential TAD of up to $14 or $15 million. If you look at that in terms of investment that you'd be making, for every dollar that you commit to TAD dollars, it could generate up to $8 in private investment in the area. And again, I think two of the key things from my perspective are that just that project alone would grow the total tax digest in the area from presently $2.3 million to about $47 million. I know another issue that came up at our last meeting of concern was what would be the impact on the construction from the project on sales taxes that you would collect, and this would have a significant impact. We estimate it would generate about $1.5 million in additional sales taxes to the city from the construction, and about $560,000 in sales taxes to the schools from its development. So both in the long term and in the short term, we think this would be a significant economic stimulus to the city. Typically in the TAD process, the way this works is that the city takes consideration, you're the sponsor of the TAD, and at the time that you make the decision that you want to proceed, typically that's when the school board becomes engaged in whether they want to commit or not commit, because basically their response is often, we're not going to commit to something that you haven't committed to. We want to see that the city is going to move ahead and do the project. So if it was your decision to proceed this year and approve the Benning TAD, our first goal during the first quarter of next year would then be to try to work out an agreement with the school system to get their participation, what it's called is the concurrence process. And we have already begun that process. We've begun the dialogue, but my expectation is we wouldn't be able to complete that until we had a clear signal as to what the city's intent was regarding the TAD. So with that, I appreciate your time, and we look forward to your support for the Benning Tech TAD project.
Okay. Thank you, sir. All right. Anybody else in the audience, raise your hand. Come on up and be heard. Mr. Ditchfield. Give them your name and address, please, sir, although we all know you.
Owen Ditchfield, P.O. Box 3232, Columbus, Georgia. I just wanted to congratulate Rick Jones and his staff on the obviously very complicated and detailed work they've done. I think it goes without saying, but I'm going to say it anyhow. This would be a major boon to South Columbus, along with other positive things that are happening there, such as Westville, the future Infantry Armor Museum, the new Walmart. All this will start bringing the economic development and the traffic that we need to support our infrastructure and make South Columbus a better place to live. And I trust all of you will agree with that and vote to pass this. Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else in the audience want to be heard this morning on the Fort Benning Technology TAD proposal? All right. Any other questions of the council?
Not at this time.
We'll bring that back next week.
Oh, we have, excuse me, Councilor Baker. Yes, okay, there we go.
Thank you.
I'm not sure it asks to. Rick, or maybe Mr. Bleakley? I could have just 1 minute, please. Instead of is it possible to get, during the financial analysis, some type of spreadsheet of projections that will say if the financing was this much in TAD bonds, the debt service monthly would be this much, and the collection for the incremental increase would be this much, so we can prove it with cash flow.
Yes.
And then the other thing is that, property taxes are annually, or, October and December.
Yeah.
But yet you could have a monthly bond commitment.
Usually,
how does that work?
Usually the bond commitment is 2 payments a year. That's
So
pretty
going-
typical.
Right, semi-annual.
Yeah.
Okay, they're going to semi-annual, okay.
Yeah.
And so in those gaps, is the developer, payment on lieu with taxes, or they fund their own bond payments? And, I would just like some details on how that works.
Oh, okay. Typically, how that would be set up, now, if you did the bond approach, there would be both a debt reserve and a capitalized interest account set up at the beginning. That would cover the initial payments. Usually it covers like 24 months of the first payments. And so
From where? A deposit from the developer?
No, that comes out of actually the bond proceeds. You have several reserves in those bond proceeds. They'll pay that until the cash flow catches up.
So you're borrowing money to pay back the money you borrowed?
Correct. You have that as a guarantee. You have that in there basically as a guarantee for the bondholders. That's right. You typically have a reserve fund and a capitalized interest fund.
Okay. I'm a little concerned about the term when we go out 25 or 30 years because there's a natural upward pressure on cost to service those areas, whether it be police and fire or wages, health insurance, whatever. But when you lock up those incremental increases for 25 or 30 years, you can't get to that money to help you. And even if there are non-TAD developments out there, if it's inside the district, those are captured too. Those are frozen too, are they not?
The only thing that's frozen is the real property tax that's paid inside the district.
Right.
So
it may not be inside the TAD, but it may be inside the district. You still capture that money, do you not?
Yes, the inside the boundaries of the TAD, the only thing you're freezing, the city will continue to get its property tax from inside that district, but you get personal property and you get any SPLOST or any sales tax related expenditures. Those continue to flow through. They're not subject to the TAD.
I understand it. I mean, if somebody decided to do a smaller development, not in a TAD, but it was inside the district.
Yes.
Then that money stays inside the.
That's correct. If that's in the district and it's incremental, as long as it's
addition
addition
to the city, that increment as well goes to the.
That's correct.
To fund the development.
Any funds above your base amount. That's
Right.
correct.
So that's what concerns me about the length of time. If we're going to have to provide a natural increase in cost of service and not be able to get potentially that money for 25 or 30 years. And I guess my last question, is there a breakdown as far as what would be the private sector piece and the public sector piece?
How much would be the committed? Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I can provide that to you.
Okay.
Yes.
And I apologize. I mean, this is a lot to have to piece together the last minute, I guess, is one of my concerns. And finally, I noticed in the document, Mr. Jones, he talks about, we all know there's property taxes, but there's also business personal property taxes.
Yes.
That most people may or may not know, but you pay tax on furniture and equipment and computers and
yes.
so forth. But it just says there's a flexibility whether or not to pledge that. But I'm assuming the bond underwriters are going to want that in writing up front.
In this case, no. The personal property will not be pledged. It's only the real property.
Okay. So even though it says in the document,
yeah,
it may be
we'll
pledged.
only have use of real property.
Real property. Okay.
Yes.
All right. Thank
and
you.
in the industrial context, sometimes that's 30% of the. From our experience, it's 30 and 40% of the property tax is personal property, so all that's going to flow through to the city. That will not
just
be
the real estate factor.
Just the real estate, just the tax on the
Okay.
real
Thank
property.
you.
Ken, I have a question tagging on to that, that Councilor Baker was asking. And I hate to ask you to do it off the top of your head, but I think you may be able to. You've done it enough. If, for instance, $100 million in new development went into this proposed TAD, not the redevelopment district, but the proposed TAD, And as I understand what you're saying, the only thing the city would be foregoing for 25 years or 30 years would be the property tax increment. So we would be receiving
Correct.
the same property tax we're receiving, which is what, $93,000 a year? And
Whatever
so
that, the current
$94,000
amount
a
you're
year.
collecting, the city will collect and the school board will continue to collect all through
Okay.
the period. There's no change in the current amount you collect. The only thing you're committing is the growth on that amount.
Okay, so we're going to keep getting that.
That's correct.
And then you've estimated that we're going to get, the city's going to get 1.5 million
Of sales tax.
of sales tax a year or over 30 years.
No, over the construction period, which we estimated is total 10 years for the
Okay,
project.
so
Yeah.
we're going to get 1.5 million we wouldn't have had. School board's going to get 500-something thousand.
Yes.
And then what about this personal property tax? Because we're going to continue to get those payments as well. So you said there's a factor of a third.
Yeah,
You're going to work that out for us. How much? So we'd be getting the 93,000, we'd be getting the 1.5 million over 10 years, and then how much in personal property would we be getting on a $100 million investment?
It depends on the character of the investment. This, because it's an industrial park, technology park, it often has high personal property because a lot of things in the buildings are taxable for that. So, but if you took 25% or 30% as kind of an average, whatever you get in property tax, you get about a third would be personal property, and that'll pass through. That's not included in the TAD. So again, I'd have to go, but it's probably in the 500,000 a year range, I would guess, once the project was completed.
Okay, so we would be getting extra monies.
Absolutely, all during that period.
Okay, all right, thank you.
And the benefit of any sales tax expenditure that it stimulates too.
Okay, Councilor Thomas.
I want also to hook on to something that Councilor Baker said, and Councilor Baker, maybe you can help explain this to me. If you look at the map, and as I understood what you said, Councilor Baker, if somebody decides to do a project up here, not a TAD project, but to build an office complex up here that's outside the TAD, and right now, we're getting, I don't know, say $4,000 property tax off of this piece up here. They build a new building, not a TAD, and the property tax goes up to $6,000. Do we still just get the $4,000 and the $2,000 goes to the TAD?
No, it's outside the TAD. The TAD doesn't get anything. Are you saying outside the TAD boundary?
I'm saying, suppose it was right here.
Oh, no impact because you don't have a TAD there. It's only in that blue, only in the blue shaded area. So let's say your example, the guy built his building in the orange part of the map, okay? That is just like you build it anywhere else in the city. He pays the full tax. You get the full revenue. Only in the blue shaded area. If he came in and built next to Benning Tech Park and built a new Quick Trip or, whatever, it doesn't matter what it is, the incremental value that he creates is pledged to the district. The district.
If the guy builds something right here in the TAD.
That's correct.
It currently is bringing in $4,000, that property.
And you get that.
He builds something, it now brings in $6,000.
Yes.
We still only get $4,000.
You get 4 and the 2,000 goes to the TAD.
And the $2,000 goes to pay off whatever the TAD.
Could pay any debts off faster. So if you get more development that occurs, your ability then to shorten the payment period on the debt is increased. Because what repays the debt isn't just one project, it's any increase that occurs in the district. So it actually works to your advantage. It lets you retire the debt faster. And that's partly the halo effect. If you get other development starts to go in there, it can accelerate your ability to pay the debt off.
Okay, and I have
but you still get the 4,000. Only 2,000 would go to the debt.
Okay. I have one other question. Is there any infrastructure out there now? Are there any sewers or water lines or any of that kind of stuff? And if not, whose responsibility is it to get all that stuff in out there if you're going to build office buildings?
Well, I mean, that's really, to answer the first part of the question, there is no infrastructure in that lower southeast part down there because it's just empty, vacant property. It's never been developed, period.
Right.
Because it's really been, be politically correct, a no-person island out there now from that standpoint. But the thing that came to mind when Mr. Felica was talking about that in terms of dealing with infrastructure is we've had projects come into this community, not just in a TAD area, where we've had things come to us, where we've had an exciting new development coming in, but to lure that development in, we had to have some improvements made. And as you all know better than I do, we were cash strapped in a lot of cases now, where you had to go find that money to make these improvements happen or make this development happen. Under this process here, you're basically setting aside that money for those kind of improvements to happen, to encourage that kind of development to occur in this part of the community or any part of the TAD that goes on from that cell. Typically, a developer will come in and make all the improvements themselves, but they may languish, is my term, I guess, here, or put off that development because they can't afford certain things. This allows us really to partner to make these developments happen, if we want to do so. And by setting aside that money, because we're still capturing that money itself, but really reinvesting itself or reinvesting those funds back into these particular projects. So it's really an inducement, if you want to call that, an encouragement factor, however you want to say it, to make things happen, especially in areas we're talking about trying to redevelop overall as a community. So typically, Councilor Thomas, a developer would come in and put all the infrastructure needs in, but in some cases it may not happen, or it may not be, and that's where the requirement comes into the state law in terms of that but-for statement. They would have to show us as a community why they couldn't do this development without these funds happening from that standpoint. And that's another part of the process we go through.
Thank you.
All right, we have Councilor Allen.
Thank you, Mayor. I guess, Mr. Bleakley, could you walk me back through the process that Councilor Baker was talking about? I think he used the term borrow money to pay off the money you borrowed. How is the whole thing set up? I mean, where does the seed money come initially?
Okay.
To get the project off the ground.
And what I'm going to describe to you is if you did tax-exempt financing, that's only one. Basically, you have three ways to finance under TAD. One is you just pay as you go. So you would commit to a project that for the next 10 years will rebate this portion of your property tax for 10 years. They get it each year for 10 years. That's called pay as you go. The other is you can set this up as a loan with a bank. So you don't have to issue tax-exempt. The banks now, particularly if they're in the couple $1 million range, are interested in these as potential loans with the city. And it's secured by the fund that you have. The TAD fund is basically the recourse they get to get repaid. But if you do a bond, which is the kind of more complicated way to do it, a public offering, the way the bond works is you would have a project come in and request funding. You do an analysis to determine how much TAD money that project could support from the district. And typically that's how so if you build $100 million of investment, let's say for the sake of argument, it could support $10 million of TAD financing based on the new property values that it's creating. The underwriters come in, and what they're going to underwrite the deal on is how certain are we that construction is going to happen. They're not going to issue any debt that they don't have control of the site. They don't have their debt and equity in place. They don't have the construction drawings, zonings in place, because their only recourse, think about it, if you were a buyer of the bonds, the only way you're going to get paid is if that increment appears. You don't get paid from the city, so you want to make sure that it appears. Since you're not pledging your full faith and credit, the underwriters require that it has at least 2 reserve accounts to protect in case there's a down cycle or whatever reason, the project's delayed. So typically what you have is 24 to 36 months of capitalized interest, which is basically a bank reserve that says until the property's built, they pay their property taxes, the taxes are collected, the check comes back to us from the tax collector. We're going to cover that period, and it's usually 24 to 36 months. There'd be a second reserve. Yes, sir.
Where does that seed money come from?
From the bond, the financing itself. It comes out of the financing. It's a cost of the financing.
Okay.
So you borrow that money. So what happens is you have a reserve, which is typically around 10, 11%. You have capitalized interest, which is your second reserve. And so those are the dollars that get you through that initial ramp-up period as the project goes forward. But if they can't show that that value is going to create on such and such a date, you won't be able to borrow the money. I mean, it's all focused on the value of the project.
So is the bank or the bond writers are working with the TAD board
With the city or whoever was structured, yeah, the city would structure the financing, that's correct.
Okay, and I'm assuming there is a TAD board appointed, or is it part of the city, or how is that? Who's
Technically under
responsible for paying off the bonds? Where does that responsibility fall?
The city, you're going to issue the bonds. The city will issue that debt.
So there's no TAD board appointed?
There's not a separate, you could use a redevelopment authority, you can use a downtown development authority, you can use your housing authority.
Rick, we've appointed them. Council appointed them. Why don't you jump in, and because I don't know that Ken knows that, just tell him who the authority is.
Council Ireland, there are really two authorities here going on. You appointed the development authority to actually sell any bonds you may want on any project from that standpoint. But there is an internal committee from the city as well, which the planning department chairs, along with finance and with the tax commissioner and with the school district, when a project comes forward. At that time, we review it, we scrutinize it, we look for all the variables in terms of financing, land use, all that good stuff that comes with it. At that point, we look for those kind of concerns and needs and try to address them. Once we have all that information in hand, then we bring it back to you again, or not again, we bring it back to you, period, and ask for your consideration at that time. So you'll have a chance to vote on it. Again, keeping in mind that the funding that is the increment funding that we receive is our funding, it's our money, and so we got to be good stewards of that money. And then in terms of doing that, in terms of whether we float a bond for something in Benning Park or somewhere else, we've got to look at 6 ways from Sunday to make sure it's going to work for us, and it's going to be a real project and a real positive project for the community as a whole.
Cut you off, Ken or Councilor Allen. I just knew Rick knew the answer to that question. So.
That's fine. The other question I had was, you mentioned the city will continue to receive, and then in this example, the $94,000 that we're receiving today, and you estimated that there would be $1.5 million roughly sales tax off of the construction project, and that would be over a 10-year period.
Yeah.
10 or less, or whatever the number is.
Yeah, hopefully less, but yeah.
But the $1.5 million, is that based on a formula, or is that?
Yeah, we assume based on their current plan in terms of there's a build-out plan that's in the TAD redevelopment plan of what they're proposing to build, and based on the estimated value of the construction materials that they would pay tax on, that's how we calculated that number, and assuming you have the pennies that you keep here locally in terms of that sales tax.
Okay, we have had some companies come into the area and build utilizing their own labor, bringing in their own supplies, so they didn't buy anything locally. They didn't hire anybody locally. So,
okay, we assumed a commercial, you would go through kind of the normal commercial development process.
So my point is that the $1.5 million is an estimate?
Yes, absolutely.
And purely speculation, and based on...
Yeah, the bids haven't gone out or anything. So.
Based on your model of if they buy local, hire local, and that kind of thing.
Right, on the materials that they would need to purchase. Absolutely.
Right. Okay. Thank you, Mayor.
Councilor Huff.
Mr. Bleakley, before you sit down. I just wanted to walk back through quickly because I've heard two things. The TAD piece in blue.
Yes.
Will be the part that concerns the incremental financing.
Yes.
The urban redevelopment area, anything built there, we get 100%?
Yes, yes, that's correct. You would get 100%, whether it's in the orange or the yellow, unless you later made a TAD in that orange area, then that would have the same increment.
Okay, until a future TAD
right now,
comes, we get 100%.
That's correct.
Okay, and then, I can't remember, but Councilor Baker, Allen, alluded to the fact of the financing. Excuse me. It was my understanding in one of the meetings that we had that it could accelerate, it could be paid off earlier, but the bond rate would be a better rate going long term. So it's highly unlikely that anybody's going to finance for less than 20 or 25 years. And correct me if I'm wrong, but if the TAD is just super duper correct, done correctly, and a big success, and we have the monies to pay it off in 10 years. If we've established a TAD for a 20-year period, it was explained to me that you can come in and add additional TADs rather than to pay off and get out and relieve the city. I'm not anything against this particular one, but I mean all TADs. That the bond rate that you would receive, it'd be in your best interest to ride it out for 20 or 25 years. And at that point, if this is a super duper success and we finish up in 10 or 15 is what I'm saying, someone can come in and add another TAD to the area and ride it out for 20 or 25 years. So we just need to know, as long as it's a TAD, we're only getting what we get that particular day before we decide to draw the lines and settle the TAD. Once we do that, we are only getting what we get for the next 20 or 25 years to service the area. Is that correct?
Yes, once you establish the boundary in that blue area, that's correct. It's frozen at that amount. That becomes what's called the base amount.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure because we were going back and forth on, I think it was
Yeah, I think one of the
confusion on the urban redevelopment area and the actual TAD itself.
I think on the financing that what you would see is, for example, if you get small projects and you do pay as you go, those projects may only do a 10-year deal or a 15-year deal. The larger, more complicated projects, you might do a 25-year deal or 20-year deal. What you're trying to do here is set the ballpark and say we can work within this ballpark, but we're going to have variability once we get this established. And the example in East Point just refinanced their bond that they did in 2001, and because they've generated so much money, they basically are going to sunset it early. They're basically they got a new lower interest rate, and they're going to pay it off in 7 years. They shorten the payoff period because they have the reserves in the account to be able to do it. So again, it's things that you'll see happen as the district matures and operates.
I just wanted council to be aware of the options. Now, my understanding in this particular TAD is more turning them of dirt. Basically, there's nothing there.
Yes, the main piece of the TAD area is undeveloped at this point.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Bleakley, related to Councilor Allen's question about hiring or doing RFP, I guess, for a developer that's not here and then brings in all their stuff. I don't know who does that, but maybe some really huge national company. But isn't the developer here the Flournoy company?
Yes.
Okay, so they're local.
Yes.
Right. Okay. All right. That's what I thought. All right. I didn't know that they would do an RFP. They're planning on developing themselves, so far as you know.
Yes, that's my
Okay.
understanding. They would be the master developer. Yes.
Okay. All right. They're the master developer? By what right? Do you know?
No, I'm saying that is their plan. They would develop the project.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Let's see. Councilor Baker.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, I thought I understood, but then I thought I got confused again. So you're setting your baseline just inside the TAD or inside the redevelopment district?
TAD. The baseline in terms of value?
No, in terms of the current property tax collections.
That's just inside the blue area, the TAD.
Okay, so the incremental increases in the orange continue to accrue to the
That's
city.
correct. They're not in the TAD. That's correct.
But they're in the redevelopment district.
Yes.
So you're
they're in eligible areas, basically, if you want to think of it that term. But yes, that'll pass through.
Okay.
You're only freezing that blue area.
Okay. Excuse me. I had gotten some conflicting information, is why I'm trying to clarify.
Oh, I'm sorry.
But that,
Yes. There you go.
That's okay. Thank you.
Well, and just for clarification in my mind, the orange area, we're creating the boundary, but someone would have to come and make application and go through the process just like Flournoy is doing today in order to have a TAD within that boundary that's been established. The boundary is being created.
Yeah, if you think about it, the orange area, you're basically setting up an area that could be eligible. You're going halfway down the road to creating potential TAD district. In the blue area, you're not only going halfway down that road, you're also creating the TAD in that area. That means that anytime in the future, somebody come back in that orange area, if they want to create a TAD there, all you basically got to do is amend the existing redevelopment plan. If they're in the yellow area, they have to start the whole process over again. They have to make it an eligible area, go through that. So you're kind of making it eligible if somebody wanted to bring a second TAD in to that orange area.
And then,
but you're only freezing the taxes in the blue area.
Exactly. And so they'll have to go through the complete process just like we're doing today.
Right.
Council will have to approve it, school district, all parties.
Correct. Because they have to pledge their...
And then they will get the same benefit the blue area is getting. And they may come in and create just a third of that orange area as their TAD, and then you still got capacity within those boundaries for another TAD and another TAD, and each one will go through the same process that we're going through today.
All right, Councilor Baker, I think you still have the floor.
I'm okay, thank you.
Okay. Let's see here, we have Councilor Allen.
Okay. What we're being shown today and asked to vote on it at some future meeting are two things. Setting the boundaries totally, which is the blue and the orange.
Correct.
But we have a plan on a requested plan on the books to go forward, which is the blue area, and that's Flournoy.
As a TAD. That's
as
correct.
a TAD.
That's correct.
Okay. So
your orange area is the redevelopment area, the bigger area, and within that area, that blue area is in there. You're just making that part the TAD. The rest is still eligible redevelopment area, but there's no TAD there. So, because that orange line actually goes all the way around the blue. It includes the blue. It's all eligible redevelopment. They're just requesting the TAD just on those blue parcels.
I kept hearing that.
Yeah.
That's the simple answer, I think, to it.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, Councilor Huff.
The maximum is 10% of the digest?
Of the city's digest,
City's
that's correct.
digest. Do you have any idea what those numbers may look like?
I mean, what would be the maximum?
Yeah.
Whoa, I should, roughly 440 million, something like that? Total value, something like that? Okay.
Yeah, I think
More than
the city's digest, and they're here,
Is what,
but it's roughly 4.6 million. Billion, I should say, yeah.
So 460, something like that.
Okay, so out of the 10% itself that we would lose, what's the estimated numbers you gave us as far as generating future? The incremental financing piece to create development, to create more sales tax?
Oh, all that pertains to is the current value when you create the district, not the value after you build it.
No, I'm saying when you build it,
yes,
it freezes. As far as what we
yes,
get.
and what that amount
and then
is.
the incremental piece goes to the TAD for the next
Yes.
20, 25 years, however long the TAD exists. So I'm saying at that point, are there, I may have not seen it, but are there numbers telling us that if we max out at 10% of the digest,
yes,
what it may increase to in the future?
Oh, what if you did the whole 10%? What it would be? Wow, no. I mean, this project, I guess the only way I could give you some input is if you take the Benning TAD and the River District TADs together, they're about 2.5%, 2.6%, so about a fourth. Those four together would produce about $600 million of new investment in the city. Okay. Now, so I guess if you argued you did the full 10%, could you get to, what would that be, $2 billion, $2.4 billion? I don't know. We'd have to look at those areas. But okay. Yeah, if you take all four TADs together, the value increase, projected value increase is up to $600 million.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay. All right. It looks like there's no further questions at this time.
All right. Going to call on Mr. Jones. We're going to continue the public hearing. The second portion will be the tax allocation district redevelopment plan submitted by Uptown Columbus. Mr. Jones, you want to walk us through the staff report on this?
Yes, sir, I do. Again, I should have asked you this when we started the first one, but I need to ask your indulgence on this and your patience, because like you, this is a brand new process for us as well. We're trying to go through this as best we know how. Hopefully we're providing you all the information, and if we don't have all the information, we'll certainly find it for you, but I just ask it, that you kind of stay with us on this. We want to go now into the what's called is being proposed the River District redevelopment plan itself. We're actually, when we go into this one now, I'm going ahead and caution you, we're going to kick it up a notch here, because just as interesting as the other one was, this one is just as got as many quirks and changes as anything else involved with that. One other final footnote here, we identify on this staff report the tax allocation districts 1, 2, and 3. Those are just numbers we put on there for right now. For all we know right now, the Benning Park could be tax allocation district 1, and these other could be 2, 3, and 4 if they go through and they are approved. So they're just numbers right now involved with that for reference only from that standpoint. But we're talking though about the tax allocation district of being at 6th Avenue and Liberty District itself. Another one would be in Uptown, the Uptown area, and then the 2nd Avenue City Village area as being all the areas within the redevelopment area itself. You see that on the maps up here. The predominantly green area is a proposed Liberty District TAD itself from that standpoint. The orange color is the Uptown TAD, and that pink violet color is the City Village area that's being proposed to you through this redevelopment plan itself. Total, and looking at all the questions again we're required to review, there are in total for this whole area, total redevelopment plan, there are 1,975 parcels, totaling just under 846 acres as a whole. There is a taxable real estate digest of 106 million here. There are 1,056 structures with a combined 9 million square feet in this area, building space that is involved with that. And the median age of the buildings in all is 93 years of age here. Again, now, we should have said this about the other one, but this is more important here. The acreage does not include any streets, right-of-ways, or other such land as noted in our staff report here from that standpoint. Again, does it provide proof that it meets one of these 4 or 5 tests here? And yes, it does in terms of looking at the redevelopment areas, in terms of things that need to be looked at in terms of dealing with historic structures or underutilized buildings. This area does certainly qualify for that as well. Ask again about does the applicant describing redevelopment project, cost estimates, or financing methods. Yeah, it talks about that, but we need to underscore the fact that there are no official site plans right now or building construction or cost estimates going on. We have no projects in mind for that in any really of the 3 TADs, but that is that potential for that to occur over time. Based on what we know and what they're projecting in terms of potential development that could happen in these areas, in that TAD 1 area itself, they purport about $113 million that could be a new market value that could go in there and support about $13.2 million in net TAD bond proceeds from that standpoint. The TAD, potential TAD is, I'm lost my train of thought here. The bonds itself in TAD, or TAD 2 could represent about $177 million from that. We support $20.3 million in net TAD bond proceeds, and the last TAD itself, this TAD 3 would represent about $191 million in new market value, and support up to about $21 million in TAD bond proceeds from that. We're looking at in terms of total investment here, we've got base value on the debt or private equity going into the area itself. Are there any contracts or agreements that need to be made? Yes, eventually there will be between us and the developer or anybody else that comes into play here in any one of these 3 potential TADs itself. What about relocation payments? We don't anticipate anything of this nature being required. But if we do, as with these TADs, potential TADs, and with the potential TAD at Benning Park, we'll go through our normal procedures based on local law, state and federal law as well, in terms of any type of relocation requirements or assistance we have to make. We'll do it from that standpoint. Does it meet the comprehensive plan and the Unified Development Board? Yes, it does, just as the other one does. Again, zoning may be a concern we have to address as the project actually come along from that standpoint. It talks again, asks about during the implementation, are estimates of redevelopment costs submitted? Yeah, it does talk about that in terms of the existing public infrastructure and prevailing market, but we also know that from that standpoint that it's somewhat inadequate right now to support the overall vision for what we're trying to accomplish in the particular area. The use of the TAD proceeds itself would be applied to eligible activities in order to lower the development cost if they come about in an amount that can be supported by market rents or sale prices and so forth from that standpoint. Again, that's really where that partnership between us and the developer actually comes into play here when it's all said and done. The idea, of course, is if you utilize those funds, we identify that as potentially lowering construction costs of the initial development and site improvements and things like that. It can also help us pay for off-site traffic improvements, infrastructure needs, streetscapes, things of that nature as we go along with any type of project from that. So the idea, though, would be to actually encourage, again, as we said with the other one, to encourage development to actually occur in one or all three of these potential TAD areas itself from that. The question that also has to be addressed is presenting of the last known assessed valuation of the redevelopment area and estimated assessed valuation, showing in this TAD 1 where the Liberty District itself was showing there's 599 tax parcels and 296 acres within those parcels itself. That TAD has an estimated value of fair market value today of 2015 of $130 million and a taxable value of $27 million from that. Within the proposed TAD, 121 of these parcels, or 20%, are actually tax exempt today. In this TAD 2, which is the Uptown, there are 389 tax parcels with 195 acres there. The estimated fair market value for that is $339 million, with a taxable digest total of $48 million from that. Within the proposed TAD, 76 parcels, or 19%, are actually tax exempt, what we're showing right now. TAD 3 is the 2nd Avenue City Village area itself. There are 987 parcels, or 171 of those, or 17%, are tax exempt from that. The area, I'm sorry, there are 987 parcels, which are 171, or 17%, are actually tax exempt today. The area includes 355 acres, and the fair market value is $105 million, with a taxable value of about $30 million included in that area. The taxable digest for all three areas, really, when you add them all up, is just 2.4% with this $4.4 billion of the tax digest itself. Keep in mind here, and I think Councilor's health question is pertinent at this time, we cannot exceed 10% of the tax digest with any TAD, period. And it was important that in this particular redevelopment plan for these three areas, that they get that number low in terms of making sure that we didn't exceed that or going anywhere close to exceeding it. Not that we ever would. Our concern was, and we have shared this with the applicants in the past, was we don't get too far ahead with this percentage that we start bumping up, so we get to this 5% or 6% of the total tax digest for any of these TADs. Because what that does is, one thing is you got to remind yourselves of the fact that once we enter into a TAD, we could be having these TADs established for 25 years at least, minimum, maybe 30. That means that we have committed those funding for the next 25 years plus. It means also, though, that we have limited ourselves to additional TADs if they come along in the future. There may be some other future TADs that we want to develop, but we may be limiting ourselves because of that percentage increase. And we just have to keep that in mind as we go along. That is not the case, though, with this redevelopment plan or with the previous one as others, as Mr. Bleakley has already indicated to. We're less than 3% overall with all this information we're talking about this morning on that. Historic properties, yes, there are historic properties in this area as well. All these properties will have to be, or have been identified. We just have to be mindful of them as we go in there, because we're talking about, again, looking at historic property in the Liberty District, also in dealing with some buildings in the TAD for Uptown, and also for City Village as well in terms of property. So we have identified those in the redevelopment plan. As we go along, though, there's going to have to be further identification that goes along with that to make sure this works for us. Has there been an effective date set for creation of the TAD? And yes, that is right now December 31st of this year. Has there been a boundary map established? You see the boundaries on here from that. It talks about here that 39% of the parcels in the River District redevelopment area are zoned right now residential 3, which is basically about a 6,000 square foot lot or more, with the majority of those homes located in TAD 3 here from that Second Avenue City Village area itself. Commercially zoned properties comprise about 37% of the redevelopment area, while exempt properties in the total add up to about 22% overall from that. There are also things in here in dealing with, there are some industrial properties as well that are in the site, commercial and residential. There's a whole mixed use bag in here in terms of everything that comes about with it. Anything, again, we have to emphasize this. I know you get tired of hearing this, but we have to emphasize this point, that implementation of the plan will be consistent with the comprehensive plan and the UDO from that standpoint. In terms of any future development that may occur, they'll also have to meet that same criteria in terms of how we're going to invest in this underdeveloped, underutilized property in the community itself. Talks about ad valorem taxes for computing allocation increments. The Liberty District right now is showing $466,661 annually for the city and $638,881 for the school district itself. The tax allocation base for TAD 2 is $825,000 right now, $753 for the city, and $1.1 for the school district as a whole on that. And then in the TAD 3, which is 2nd Avenue and City Village, we're showing that price value right now to be $518,583 for the city and $705,430 for the school district. The total allocation increment for all 3 TADs, when it's all said and done here, is proposed to be $1.8 million for the city and $2.4 for the school district from that standpoint. It talks about, again, the amount of proposed tax allocation bonds and issues. Yeah, it does purport that the estimated supported levels, according to the plan itself, would be $55 million to $70 million involved in that range. And again, this depends also on where the participation by the school district itself. And looking at, again, 25 years being the length of time for those bonds itself. The estimated positive tax allocation increments are in here in terms, again, of going no longer than 30 years overall, but looking at, again, dealing with the bonds at being 25 and that. The applicant does specify the properties proposed to be pledged using bonds or pay-as-you-go agreements, which would be secured by deposit tax allocation increments and so forth. And again, to Councilor Baker's point here, we do have the statement here that talks about we also reserve the flexibility to pledge ad valorem tax increments on business property tax. We're not advocating that today, but I'm just saying again, to make that point, that is an option. I don't know if we'd ever use it, but that is an option that is made available to us if we so desire for that. Going to the school district now, what the impact may have on it. They are projected right now in the plan itself, the redevelopment plan, a little over 2,800 residents with about a little over 1,400 new housing units to be constructed in all 3 TADs itself. Over the next 15 years, they're estimating that on average about 25 school-aged children will be added to the school district annually involved with that, and probably reaching a little right between 375 and 400 students probably by the end of the 15th year, what they're showing here on the plan, which is reasonable request. There are 3 Well, we're showing right now that the school district itself, the schools that cover the area, of course, are downtown elementary. There is Fox Elementary in the area as well. We don't indicate on here that we can go back and look at it again with the middle schools and high schools. But again, I don't know the capacity, particularly with the elementary schools, is to the point where they couldn't absorb the additional students right now. I see no indication that indicates that as well. Estimate of the splosh to be generated over this time, reported here that over the first 15 years, about $1.1 million in e-splosh money, additional revenue would be coming back from the development to the school district itself. And then, of course, the tax digest and the calculations and so forth, we are going through that as well. That, in general, involved with that. I'll call your attention one more time back to the map now. And unlike the other one, where there was an orange area left, it was just purely nothing more than just the redevelopment area, not necessarily the TAD. The boundary that are shown on the redevelopment plan here and the three areas are actually all encompassing of the plan itself, and it established the TADs, as you see on here. So we're not really leaving anything out in the redevelopment areas for the most part. We're not really leaving any area out of that. The other concern that we haven't really addressed is the timing factor on this. I think that's important. We have made some direct communication with the tax collector and the tax assessor on this in terms of making sure that they can meet their needs in terms of getting the tax bills out, setting up the programs and everything else. They may need to come in and share that information with you and give you a better understanding. Keep in mind now, again, not to repeat myself here, but keep in mind, if these tasks do go forward and you're given the opportunity to vote on it next Tuesday, you have to do that by the end of this year to establish that base plan, or that baseline rather, for the tax digest to be used in the tax allocation districts. In order to do that, though, in establishing that, you've got to have the mechanisms to make it work so we can actually assess the tax and actually collect it. And that's important to us. And there may be some factors that need to be discussed on that as well.
All right. Okay, we'll
Mayor Pro Tem?
Rick, just for the record, and as I understand it, with these TADs, even though there's three different areas, everything is on its own, right?
I'm sorry, everything's,
On its own.
yes, that's
The
correct.
money that's applicable to the Liberty District goes back into the Liberty District. You can't take money from one TAD and use it on another.
No, you cannot.
Okay.
Mayor Pro Tem, I appreciate the question also. This is not an all or nothing program either in terms of you're adopting these TADs. These TADs can be adopted individually. I'm just going to say, if you like one over the other, that's fine. You don't have to take all three. You can either approve, again, disapprove, or approve with conditions. But the money that is generated, say, like in the potential city village area, stays in city village. We cannot take that money and utilize it for road improvements in the Liberty District, for instance, or in Uptown. That money has to be dedicated solely really for that one particular TAD. And that's how we keep the accounting straight on this and make sure everything happens.
Okay. All right. We have Councilor Baker.
Yeah. Rick, at the point we are now, why wouldn't we just be approving the district? Why would we be approving individual TADs when there's no specific projects? I mean, why wouldn't we just be approving the district?
The state law mandates to us that we have to approve a redevelopment plan, period. The redevelopment plan really encompasses all three of these TADs. Now, as far as the TADs themselves, though, you can opt out in terms of which TAD you want to approve or disapprove involved. You have to have a redevelopment plan for any of the TADs to go forward, and they're all combined